Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time Show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. First up on the show, we'll be speaking with Karen Fletcher, and Karen is the Managing Lawyer of Public Interest Law at Fitzroy Legal Service in Melbourne and a long-time advocate for the rights of people in prison. And we'll be speaking with Karen about various issues, one of them being her work with adult prisoners. We may actually touch on the topic of youth and what's happening there, although next week I will be speaking with Tiffany Overall from Youth Law about that. And I want to speak to Karen about the prison lockdowns, and there was quite a lot of information in The Age about that and various other media sources. And I want to speak to her about the lockdown in prisons because of the fact that some guards tested positive for coronavirus, although it might be in the singular, and I'll clarify that with her. But really the reason why I invited Karen on the show was just to discuss with her some of the issues in regards to prisoners and in the context of the pandemic, and to talk about this really, really worrying and disturbing health crisis. After Karen, we will be speaking with Dr. Hannah Mcglade, and Dr. Hannah is actually a Senior Indigenous Research Fellow at Curtin University in New South Wales. And we'll be speaking with Hannah about state violence, and she'll be sharing with us a number of suicides and a number of cases in regards to state violence, with a particular focus on Indigenous children. And so we'll be speaking with her shortly about that. So before we go speaking to Karen, we'll go into a very, very quick announcement.
Fitzroy Legal Service has launched a free information and advice phone service for people who have been stopped, questioned, fined or charged for breaching the new COVID-19 restrictions. Have you been fined or charged under the new laws, or stopped and questioned by police for being outside?
Call 0434 136 501, weekdays between 9am and 5pm. That's 0434 136 501. Or head to fitzroy-legal.org.au for more information. You can also report incidents at covidpolicing.org.au.
Fitzroy Legal Service is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doin' Time Show, and we're going to be speaking now with Karen. Hello, Karen. Welcome.
Hi.
It's lovely to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Now, Karen, you're from Fitzroy Legal Service, and I imagine you would have heard the intro while you were waiting for me to come.
Yes, I'm from Fitzroy Legal Service.
Yep.
I've got a show on the line.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you do.
We have a prison advice service which operates on Fridays from 10 till 4, and prisoners can ring in on that number if they have our phone number on their phone card. So I'll give the number at the beginning and then again at the end perhaps. It's 03 9484 4751. That's staffed on Fridays between 9:30 and 4:30 by lawyers and paralegals, and we can speak to people in prison and their families and loved ones about prison law issues.
That's fantastic, and we do actually have a listenership in prisons for the Doing Time show, so that's really useful that you've given that out. And we'll do that at the end, Karen. That's a good idea. So what do you think about all this, about the health crisis and what's happening with prisons? I mean, we've done quite a lot of extensive coverage on our show in regards to the pandemic and how there really is such a lack of hygiene in prisons, and indeed prisoners are very much excluded from all this. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, look, I think it's true to say that prisons are one of the highest risk environments for transmission of COVID-19. They're right up there with cruise ships, health facilities, aged care facilities, all places where there are people who are living in a high density and people who've got compromised health. And international experience has been that once COVID-19 infection gets into a prison, usually it's through staff, prison officers or contractors, it spreads extremely quickly and it has devastating results. And we've seen very high rates of death in prisons in other countries, and particularly in the United States, where mass incarceration is probably the highest in the world.
Absolutely. And so there's been a lockdown of prisons across the state, Karen. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the strategy in Victoria, where we are, and I would say in other Australian jurisdictions, has been to sort of focus on trying to keep COVID-19 out of the prisons, which of course is the first line of defence. And there's been, I think, arguably not so much attention on what is going to happen if COVID-19 gets in. And all public health advice is that the only and the most important public health measure if COVID-19 gets into a prison is to reduce the size of the population and get people out. So all public health advice is that we need to be focusing on getting people out, particularly young people, elderly people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and people with compromised immune systems because of other illnesses. And there's mechanisms available to do that. We've got the ability in Victoria for the prison operators to release people 14 days early if there's an emergency situation like this, which would have a huge impact because about half of all prisoners serve less than a month. Most people serve very, very short terms in prison, so releasing people 14 days early would have a huge impact. But there's also some laws there that enable people to be released if they're in very poor health and they need to be released for health reasons. But there hasn't been focus on that decarceration as a public health measure in Australian prisons. As I said, the main focus has been on quarantining prisoners or locking people down when they first come into prisons. And now that there have been cases of both people on remand and prison staff testing positive for COVID-19, there's now this big emphasis on locking everybody down in the youth detention centres and the prisons. And several prisons have had full lockdowns where people are confined to their cells completely. On one day last week, we had a day where people couldn't even get to court or even by video conference for their bail hearings. Keeping visitors out, preventing prisoners from having access to things like education programs, libraries, exercise. I think it's fair to say that it's been a pretty one-sided response to COVID-19 in Australia, and our concern is if the numbers are not reduced, and even when it does get inside, and we think that there is a real risk of that, there is a real risk that people could become very unwell and that we'll see deaths inside Victorian prisons.
In all honesty, I'm surprised that there haven't been deaths inside prisons so far, unless the numbers haven't been released to us. It seems like the situation early in the pandemic was, where most of the cases were returned travellers, that there was much less of a risk of getting inside.
But now, every day it seems like we're hearing of another member of prison staff or a remand prisoner being tested positive. And I think it is really just a matter of time before somebody who's, pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic goes in to do a shift in a prison and the virus is spread. There is also an issue that prisoners are reporting to us that they're asking to be tested and being refused tests at the moment. So there is a risk that it could spread quickly without the prison authorities even knowing that it is spreading.
So tests are being refused to prisoners when they ask?
Yeah, so one of the issues we've had is that there has been mass testing in the community, and people in the general community on the outside are able to go down to Northland or wherever and get a test if they wanted to. But prisoners that are asking for tests in the prisons, we're hearing are being refused. The prison authorities say that they are testing people who have got symptoms, but there's 7,000 people in the prison system, and the last I heard they had swabbed about 500. So very low rates of testing in the prisons at the moment. I think there is this real reliance on thinking that the 14-day quarantine of people going into prisons is going to be enough to keep the virus out.
And that's so untrue. Indeed, our prison system is very overcrowded, and social distancing would be virtually impossible, and lockdowns create a really, unstable environment.
Yeah, well, lockdowns are extremely dangerous to people's health in other ways, apart from COVID-19. We've heard it said by prison operators that they could lock down the whole system for the whole of the pandemic if necessary, and there's no doubt that would lead to severe mental health problems, especially for young people and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but for all people in the prison system, because, when we talk about a lockdown in prison, it's not like a lockdown on the outside. There's no going out for exercise. There's nothing to do in the cell. It can be quite dangerous where people are doubled up or tripled up in a cell because of overcrowding, being locked in a very small room for a long period of time with other people that you don't necessarily get on with a toilet. In a doubled up or tripled up cell, the toilet is next to somebody's head, the way that the rooms are configured. No personal visits. We're getting reports. There's been no personal visits for months in the prisons, and so people haven't been seeing their parents or their children or their loved ones, husbands and wives. And the prison system is supposed to be providing mobile phones and iPads and other technology so that people can have video visits. But the reports that we're getting is there's just not enough equipment. And there's also problems with the connectivity of the equipment. In some places, the cell walls are so thick that the Wi-Fi can't get through. People are being taken to the visits area to do video visits, and that's reducing the number of visits that they can have. Having difficulty getting in touch with lawyers and other professional visitors. No, face-to-face contact with counsellors, psychologists. So that kind of treatment, especially when it continues for days and weeks and months, is extremely dangerous to people's health.
Absolutely. And why is it that there are early release programs that have been established in the US and the UK and parts of Europe and not in Australia? I wonder whether Australia is still considered a penal settlement. I mean, that's probably a very a very radical thing to say, I suppose, but it just seems really, really strange, Karen, that, it's not happening.
Yeah. One of the things we've noticed is the public health measures when it relates to prisons, are extremely politicised in Australia. Yes. Rather than seeing it as a public health measure, there's a real willingness, particularly for opposition parties, and here in Victoria this is certainly the case, to make allegations that this is not a public health measure, but it's, a free ticket out of prison, rather than something that needs to be done because of the pandemic. And the way that the government is responding seems to sort of accept that politicisation by saying we're not going to release people early. That's got nothing to do with the pandemic. I think we've really got to try to win this discussion about that. This is not. We're not mucking around here. This is actually a deadly virus, and these are absolutely essential public health measures to save lives. It's not a political issue, like at an election about who's going to be the toughest on crime.
That's exactly correct. And in fact, the only way really that the government's organising this in Victoria is that they're saying that new prisoners are being swabbed and placed in 14-day protective quarantine away from the general prison population. Does that not also create an unstable environment and mental health issues too?
Yeah, for people coming into prison, I mean, the vast majority of people coming into and going out of prison are there for, less serious offences and for a short period of time. And it can be very dangerous to keep people like that who are already traumatised and maybe suffering, drug withdrawal or alcohol withdrawal or other kinds of mental health issues in total solitary for 14 days. But the other issue with it is that it's not necessarily effective, because the main way that the virus probably gets into prisons in most jurisdictions is actually via staff. There's so many staff, correctional officers and contractors of all sorts, cleaners and all sorts of people coming in and out of prisons all the time. And we know that this virus can a person can be infectious without having any symptoms. So the biggest risk is actually from staff without symptoms going to work. And as the Premier has been saying, and the Chief Health Officer has been saying for the last few days, it's actually workplaces that are the biggest driver of infections at the moment in the pandemic. And prisons are huge workplaces. And a lot of the staff there are not particularly secure or well paid. We've had a story last week of a prison officer who worked for G4S, the private prison operator at Port Phillip Prison, who was moonlighting as hotel quarantine security in April. I think he did 8 shifts or something in hotel quarantine while he was working in the prison. And, that obviously hotel quarantine was a very high-risk work environment, and the private prison operator G4S say that they weren't even aware that he was working in that environment. So that's the kind of risk that they're not even aware of. It's really only a matter of time before the infection gets in.
Absolutely. I'm very worried about it, to be honest, Karen. And
it's really worrying, and I really feel for families and loved ones who've got people in prison.
Yes.
Because it's a constant source of anxiety about what's going to happen.
Absolutely, and in particular because the loved ones are cut off now. They're not able to visit the prisoners.
Yeah, and also, I mean, prisoners who are allowed to have access to the common areas in their units were able to use the Arunta phone system to call families and friends. But when you're locked down, you can't get to the phone system. So the usual daily phone calls that people were making, perhaps to their kids or their wife or husband or girlfriend or whatever, those calls can't happen when you're in lockdown.
Indeed, and I know you work with adults, but just to quickly touch on this, what about children and who are in prison as well? That would be terrible. Yeah,
it is. It's shocking to think about children and young people being locked down in these conditions, especially with the anxiety around the pandemic as well, and not having their usual access to their parents or other carers. This is really an emergency situation, and that's why I say it's really important that government doesn't take a politicised attitude towards this and addresses it as a public health issue that it is.
Indeed, and Karen, what about in terms of social distancing? In terms of the fact that prisoners do have to be strip searched, don't they? And there are other intrusive factors at play here.
Yeah, so I think that prison system, the corrections are their view seems to be that they can achieve some kind of social distancing through solitary confinement, which just, as we've talked about, has its own risks. And the reason that they can't provide good social distancing apart from that is because the prisons have got so many people in them. So the common areas and the equipment and facilities in the common areas are used by so many people at once. That makes social distancing very difficult. And that's why reducing the size of the prison population and taking out anybody who doesn't need to be there, bailing everybody who can be bailed, paroling everybody who can be paroled, giving health leave to people who need it, giving 14 days early release to prisoners nearing the end of their sentence. That's why those things need to be put in place, because with that many people in a confined space, and in a lot of prisons you can't open the windows, so you don't get any, through air, and you can't get out into exercise yards and those sorts of things. And unless you actually reduce those numbers, you're right, social distancing is something that people just can't do.
Absolutely. And how are you doing your work, Karen, if you're not able to get in to see the prisoners?
It's very difficult. So there's a lot of negotiation to try to get phone calls or video conferences. It used to be that we could get video conferences by booking them with corrections in a fairly straightforward way. Sometimes you could get them on the same day or usually the next day. At the moment, the video conferencing system is so blocked up because it's being used for court and for all other purposes. And sometimes, we can be asked to wait a week before we can get a video conference with a client. Similarly, our Friday advice sessions, people in prisons wanting to access our phone advice line or Victoria Legal Aid or the Ombudsman or their own private lawyer, they would need to use the phone system that's in the common areas, but while they're locked down, they can't get out to do that. So we are noticing that there's a drop in the number of people contacting us from prisons because of so many lockdowns having occurred in the last couple of weeks.
So basically the lockdowns then, are they all the prisons?
It has been on and off for a number of prisons in the last couple of weeks, depending on who they've identified. So the Metropolitan Remand Centre was locked down. I'm not sure if they still are because of a remand prisoner. There was a prison officer identified at Ravenhall, and Ravenhall was locked down and I believe still is while they checked all the close contacts of that prison officer. I believe that officer was also involved in prison transport to 6 other prisons. So those 6 other prisons were also locked down while they did testing of close contacts and people in prison who'd had contact with that officer. So at the moment, it's sort of, a lockdown will be for a couple of days and then lifted. But of course, as you mentioned, there's the systematic lockdowns for 14 days of someone who's coming into the system, and that's going on constantly.
Thank you so much for coming onto the program, Karen. Are you just able to give out the number of the advice line again?
Sure. So this is open to people in prison, but also to people who have loved ones in prison. It's the Fitzroy Legal Service Prison Law Advice Line, 03 9484 4751, and it operates on Fridays from 9:30am to 4:30pm.
What a mess this health crisis is providing, Karen. It's awful.
Yeah.
And, often when I start getting annoyed and thinking, I can't go out, I think, well, you know what? It's worse for people in prison than me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, this use of the word lockdown in sort of general, But people who are talking about being locked down, I mean, it is unpleasant for people, especially ones who have a positive result or are close contact, and they need to isolate, for at least 14 days and sometimes more. That is awful. But the rest of us, we can go out for exercise, we can go out to shop, and we've got a lot of us have got access to phones and videos and Zoom and all these things. But a lockdown in prison in solitary is not like that at all. It's actually an extremely... It's torture, actually. It's been defined as torture, long-term solitary confinement.
And let's give a call out to the Victorian government and indeed the federal government to release prisoners, people in prison early.
Yeah, look, I think if I had one message, it's that solitary confinement is not the answer. Decarceration is the public health measure that we really need.
Any final comments, Karen?
No, I think that's probably the main thing I would say. The Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and their CEO, Marisa, have been doing a lot of work around this, and I think it's probably worth mentioning that, of course, because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are so much more disproportionately imprisoned than any other part of the Australian population, that this is having a particular impact on First Nations communities and families and people in prison. And, yeah, I think that given that we live in the time of Black Lives Matter, it's important that should be recognised, and the government should also feel the pressure to make sure that First Nations communities are not suffering disproportionately because of this. And at the moment, they are. And we also know from a lot of research that solitary confinement has a particularly damaging effect on people from First Nations communities and shouldn't be used except as a very final resort.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, there simply isn't enough, there aren't enough diversion programs, or whether you're in prison or out of prison, there's not enough culturally appropriate programs at all.
Yeah, I think, this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, like in a lot of areas, it's really shown up the weaknesses and problems in our society. And one of them is the overuse of imprisonment. Pick a social issue, and imprisonment is sort of offered as the so-called solution. And we've ended up with thousands of people passing through prisons each year on short sentences and longer sentences, of course. But prison being used for minor drug offences, non-violent offences, all of these things, which if there were better alternatives available and imprisonment was not the first resort, then we wouldn't have such a big problem, a big public health problem at the moment.
Absolutely, and we I suppose we're running out of time, but also the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, the recommendations certainly have not been upheld where prison's a last resort, and that was even before the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it much worse now. That's right.
Yeah, and especially for young people, and I guess I'm not sure if you're covering it today, but and I haven't heard what the result is, but there's a big campaign at the moment to raise the age of criminal responsibility and to prevent children, particularly under 14, but all children from being imprisoned. That's a really important part of what we need to do.
Indeed it is, and I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Hannah Mcglade, who's a Noongar woman, next, and I hope to be speaking a little bit about that with her. But next week we're going to be having Tiffany Overall from Youth Law, who will be covering that topic in a lot of detail next Monday.
Great, I'll be listening.
Good on you, Karen. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
You take
Lovely
care.
To meet
Stay
you.
safe. Okay.
Yeah,
you
bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
Isolated? Quarantined? Need some essentials but can't leave the house? Or just having a hard time dealing with everything at the moment? Queer Aid NARM is a new mutual aid group of organised volunteers. We're here, we're queer, and we've got your back. Whether or not that's how you identify, nobody should be suffering because capitalism or the state didn't provide what they needed. That's why we're working to strengthen our communities through solidarity. Put in a request for help and we'll match you with a volunteer in your area who can either pick up groceries or other essentials for you, help you run errands, cook meals for you, or check in with how you're going. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, or if you want to join the volunteer list, find us on queeraidmelbourne.org or search for us via Facebook. COVID-19 Queer Aid NARM Melbourne. So tell your family and your friends, and don't forget your neighbours. That's queeraidmelbourne.org, a 3CR supporter.
Goongerah Environment Centre is a grassroots community organisation campaigning for East Gippsland's precious forests. For over 15 years, we've been using direct action, citizen science and community engagement to stop the continued logging of precious native forests and threatened species habitat. After this summer's terrible bushfires, there's an even greater urgency to protect what remains, and the Victorian government haven't ruled out plans to log the small fragments of unburnt forests and so-called salvage log in burnt areas. It's now so important that forests and wildlife are protected so they can recover. Head to gecko.org.au to keep updated with the latest news and to get involved. Gecko acknowledges the logging is happening on the stolen lands of the Gunnerkurnai and Bidwell and Monaro people, and that sovereignty was never ceded.
A 3CR supporter. The Queen Victoria Women's Centre is calling all craftivists to join us and make a fuss. Make a Fuss is a crowdsourced craftivist project looking for submissions on the theme of women's silence. If you've experienced a time when you didn't want to make a fuss, why not get crafting and make some noise? For more information, go to qvwc.org.au and click on Make a Fuss. Submissions close August 19th. Queen Victoria Women's Centre is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. And coming up next, we've got Dr. Hannah Mcglade, and we're going to be speaking about state violence, and we're going to be also speaking about some very, very, very confronting topics in regards to young Aboriginal people being in state care. Hello, Hannah. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you for having me on the program.
It's so lovely to have you. I'm wondering if you could just start off by telling us what land you're on and talk about a little bit about yourself.
So I'm in Perth, and people call Perth now the Noongar people, part of the Bibbulmun Nation. We have many different groups within our people, but we're all one people still. So, yeah.
No, that's great. So I was talking in my intro about how there's been a lot of young Aboriginal teenagers who've actually suicided in state care. Is that something that you'd want to talk about today on the show?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about this very troubling and problematic issue.
Absolutely. So where do we start?
Where do we start? Yeah, it's such an old story, really, about what's been happening in this country for, since the point of European contact with Aboriginal people, and we're still Aboriginal people experiencing this systemic discrimination and structural violence, where the perpetrators are basically state agencies, and that's why I guess Black Lives Matter has been such a powerful movement and a truth-telling time for us here in this country as well.
Absolutely, and I suppose I use the word confronting because a lot of people don't like to hear the word suicide, do they?
No, it's really sad issue. Aboriginal families are being ripped apart by particularly youth suicide. It's a major issue in Australia as well, but we have particularly higher rates. And I'm just looking at the story on the front page of the West Australian. I think it's, I don't know if it's today's or yesterday, but a child who had been placed in 57 different out-of-home care placements in her short 17-year life, but left them for unsafe living situations. And she had took her life after police left her wandering the streets at Lyne at night following the arrest of her much older boyfriend after he assaulted her on a Perth bus. So we have rising child removal rates across the country, and particularly in West Australia. We're fighting for better law in our state at the moment, and we have a bill that is not respecting Aboriginal families' rights to participate and which will render our children more unsafe. We have that bill in the upper house of Parliament before a standing committee on legislation. But certainly the cases of children who are dying after finding years of abuse in the out-of-home care system is, should be shining a spotlight on the severity of what is happening in terms of Aboriginal human rights, that even the children are being treated in such a horrific manner.
Would you say that this is about stolen generation and genocide?
Yes, I think it's a form of ongoing genocide, really, and forced assimilation that's not acknowledged. And we know that when the National Human Rights Institution made a finding officially of genocide in the 1990s, following the Bringing Them Home inquiry, that the then government and Prime Minister John Howard repudiated that work, which was, it was based in proper evidence gathering across the country and documentary evidence from the Parliament and states about their intentions at that time. And of course now no states admit to wanting to assimilate Aboriginal people anymore, and we have reconciliation plans everywhere, but there is still an assimilationist mindset, and the fact that departments are removing Aboriginal children without properly talking to families, and that states aren't properly investing in early intervention, and the underlying drivers of child removal. For example, the issue of violence against Indigenous women, the issue of poverty and homelessness, that these have been, used as reasons to remove Aboriginal children and place them increasingly with non-Aboriginal families and, subject them to often, abuse and state care. So, yes, I do. I think this is, assimilation is still a battle that we are facing, and that the consequences are so dire that, it is not out of reach to be talking about genocide being ongoing, as many Aboriginal people believe.
Certainly not, and I think what really irks me as a radio broadcaster and also as a human rights activist is when some people say, oh yes, but you've got to get over the past.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? The past, and it's so present. So what are they telling people to get over? The present abuse and violation of human rights and disregard for our fundamental human rights, particularly right to Aboriginal self-determination. And if we look, say, at what's happening now with our Child Protection Bill that we, Aboriginal people, including the National Body for Children's SNAIC, are opposing, it does actually acknowledge Aboriginal self-determination in the bill, but it's like a backhand slap then. It says you can place a child, make its placement decision after consultation with one Aboriginal family member. And we're arguing, we're arguing for Aboriginal family-led decision-making, which is a best practice model supported in legislation in Victoria and Queensland, and which actually gives the family a chance to make a decision that will stop the removal or keep the child in the extended family. And, it's like we have to have a fight over it. So, yeah.
So, Hannah, can you talk about the particulars of this bill? And let me just clarify. So this bill is supposed to help Aboriginal children in the child protection system, but it actually doesn't, right?
Yes. In fact, it's going to render children more vulnerable to removal. And we actually had a 5% increase in Aboriginal child removal in West Australia during COVID. And the national body, SNAIC, have estimated that there'll be a tripling of Aboriginal child removal rates across Australia without drastic urgent interventions, which they set out in the roadmap to reform as part of the Family Matters campaign. And one of the key platforms of that campaign is Aboriginal family-led decision-making and giving families a right to be involved in the decision-making, of course. And that's being resisted in WA. It is occurring now in Victoria and Queensland. There was a pilot in Queensland and it was shown to have no good outcome. I mean, keeping kids with their families.
So, if the consultation is done properly, then it's okay.
Yeah, well, if the consultation or the actual Aboriginal family meeting happens, the family are the people that know best what the issues are. It doesn't mean that, it just means giving an opportunity to the family to have the meeting about before significant decisions are taken. It's a shifting of the balance of power where currently the child protection worker has so much power, and we saw in New South Wales the recent inquiry, I think it was called the Davis inquiry, showed that actually this was a very dangerous situation and that in regards to removals that were happening for Aboriginal children, they showed that there was actually false information being presented to courts as well. And they recommended an independent body there to handle the court aspect of child protection. But, so it's a shift of balance. It's not all up to the child protection worker who, in some ways is acting many times like the good old native welfare workers that removed Aboriginal children by virtue of them being, Aboriginal. There are allegations levelled against families. There are roadblocks put up when families make a lot of efforts to address what the concerns are. And there's an unwillingness to consider reunification when Aboriginal mothers, for example, have become very stable in their lives and can look after their children, and the department knows that, yet they still have decided to keep some children, say, which doesn't make any sense at all, and it's just a form of, punishment and cruelty to the Aboriginal parents, really. So there's growing evidence. Yeah, absolutely. There's structural racism and systemic racism and individual racism happening every day of the week in relation to a great deal of cases, I believe, and there's no requirement for this system to have cultural safety or respect for Aboriginal, people and culture. And that's why bringing them home all those years ago in 1996 in their final report said that Aboriginal child protection, the jurisdiction needs to be transferred to Aboriginal people. And that has only happened to date in Victoria in the last maybe 2 years. It's happened in some jurisdictions in Canada, but I have also been informed by Native Canadian Indigenous Aboriginal people there that they are struggling as well with this issue of increasing Aboriginal child removals in provinces. It's become a very big political issue there, as it has in New Zealand, where the Māori people and elders and leaders have had their own inquiry into removal of the Māori children and called for the resignation of the minister responsible and the CEO of the relevant body there, the Oranga Tamariki. So we're seeing, this is an international Indigenous human rights issue of the highest order. We know that, this is a form of ongoing attack on people and families.
So in some ways, even though there are bills and there's meant to be protocols, it could be construed as 1788 all over again.
Yeah, well, there's a real denial, I think, to recognise, that Aboriginal people have rights to sovereignty and self-determination and rights to family and rights to their own children. So that's clearly a war that we are waging, a modern-day war for our, Aboriginal human rights, fundamental rights. And we are living in clearly a settler society that is resisting. And, I was actually attacked in Parliament by a minister, Ben White, who himself is descended from the stolen generation. His father was actually a bit of a fighter for Aboriginal rights, so that's very sad. He's not spent time to understand what the issues are. He's also the treasurer, which may explain why he hasn't had the time to talk properly with Aboriginal people and understand why the law and the bill in its current form needs to be amended. Simply hasn't had the time probably to really look at these issues or speak to Aboriginal women about what they're actually experiencing. I've worked with Aboriginal victim support, family violence services, and these services, which are Australia-wide, but particularly in West Australia, can tell you exactly what the kind of treatment Aboriginal mothers who are victims of violence are experiencing from the department, and it is highly abusive. But yeah, we are fighting a war and a battle, and we're not giving up at all.
Absolutely. In fact, I interviewed Bronwyn Carlson about Indigenous femicide, and it's interconnected, isn't it?
Yes, it's absolutely interconnected, and this violence against the Aboriginal women, it's extended to is linked and extended intrinsically to the violence against Aboriginal children. The mothers and the children are being, assaulted together in these ways of, that do amount to structural violence. And if we look at the front page and investigation into the death of this young girl, to be taken from your family, put in 57 different homes where you were unsafe, subject to numerous physical and sexual assaults by much older men, living on the streets, unsurprisingly developing alcoholism, and needed a liver transplant by 17 before she killed herself after the police abandoned her. Yeah.
Oh, that's awful. Yes, here's the headline. Special investigation. Aboriginal teenager in state care dies from suicide after being left alone at night by WA police.
Yes, and then we have the WA coroner, none of whom who have done justice to any Aboriginal deaths, investigating. I don't know if they have called any Aboriginal expertise to give evidence. It doesn't appear that they have, and clearly should have. So it'd be interesting to see what the coroner's reports say, but they certainly do appear to almost normalise the horrific violence that Aboriginal people are experiencing and children are experiencing.
And they're rendered invisible, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, like this story will show it up, and only a week or so ago there was a young man who committed suicide in Hakea when his mental health issues were known, and not unlike, I'm sure, the young Benell boy who committed suicide when his mental health needs were completely neglected in prison. Society keeps seeing it, and then we have no changes. And currently I'm involved in supporting several Aboriginal families whose sons, in one case the young male prisoner has no parents, but these prisoners who are in their early 20s are all being subjected to an isolation regime in prison, which means they are locked in a cell for 23 out of 24 hours in a day and shackled a lot of the time too when they have non-contact visits. And this is going on for extensive periods of time, varying different periods, but we're talking about months. This is a treatment that's been condemned by the United Nations. It's a clear violation of human rights law. We've signed the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture, and yet we have these prisons run often by English people who are attacking, young, vulnerable Aboriginal men who have disability as well. And this is only, really going to, create, further disability and risk of suicide. So these are the practices that we're seeing. I'm also hearing about police dogs being used on Aboriginal people more frequently now, and people being injured by dog bites as well. It's pretty horrific, and we were the first state to disband the Aboriginal Justice Committee, and the Australian Law Reform Commission said in the Pathways to Justice inquiry that was delivered 2 years ago re-established the Aboriginal Justice Committees in the states urgently. And that's, what we really need to be at least a starting point here, which we don't have the year of government though.
Why in particular Western Australia? Why does it sound to me like not the worst state, but there's a lot going on in Western Australia?
Yeah, it's been pretty bad, hasn't it? Look, when I was growing up, there was a campaign to stop land rights in WA. The mining companies were very powerful. Apparently, a lot of most richest people in the world live in, they're from connected over this side of the country. But yeah, they were very powerful. Those interests, the mining interests, and they stopped land rights happening in West Australia back in the 80s. And we were colonised, 100 plus years after the East Coast. And I wonder if, our physical distance and isolation from other parts of the country is relevant. When I was growing up, it was kind of like WA and Queensland were really on par. Queensland seems to have gone ahead a lot more in terms of Indigenous affairs and issues. So it's not, nowhere is perfect in this country, obviously. But West Australia should be absolutely ashamed of itself, and it's a Labor government too. This is the government that, was supposed to be committed to Aboriginal people. That hasn't. First political party, or I'm not sure. I don't know if the Greens have, but certainly they've signed a reconciliation. They've got a reconciliation plan now. It just goes out the window. When it comes to the actual reality of how they're doing business. Yeah.
And for you to be attacked in Parliament, I mean, when you were trying to help. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm well known. As you said, I'm well known. I've personally been around and knows a lot. And I certainly have been 30 years and particularly strong on violence against women and children and human rights. And I'm at the level now of representing Indigenous issues in the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. Yes, maybe I'll take it as a compliment that they know that I'm going to speak up very clearly about these human rights issues. Yeah, effective maybe. But yeah, there's a lack of respect for Aboriginal women, too often. And Ben White is showing himself to be completely out of touch. We've had a lot of desecration of Aboriginal sites, the horrific Rio Tinto destruction of the Duke and George site. And then it was subsequently, revealed that in fact BHP were also planning, that they were doing this for their operations, and that minister hadn't overridden the approvals. This has been so long standing since as a young law student, we would protest to protect sacred sites, and Aboriginal recommendations for protection of those sites were constantly being overridden by the minister. So nothing has changed except now, people are shocked across the world how, ancient heritage sites being treated in such a disgraceful way for the corporate interest and the dollar.
So that's all interrelated because of the fact that the government wants the land, and that's why Aboriginal women aren't respected as well.
That's right. It's all connected. This attack on the land, and Aboriginal, the Noongar word for land is budja, and the word for the woman when she's carrying the baby is budjari from country too. So, the women and the land, and we're part of our land, and this is absolutely interconnected to the non-Indigenous capitalist and mentality of extraction. We are ourselves, some people saying as Aboriginal people, it seems some kind of extractive industry now, and that if you think of how much it costs, Australia to continue to, impose this kind of mass incarceration, this, genocidal child removal. This is phenomenal costing, but it's an industry, it's sort of non-Indigenous, and it's apparently so necessary, clearly, because at the end of the day, it is a fight over our land and our right to be free people.
And the land is our mother, really.
That's right. Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's sad. Yeah. I grew up with my country. I was going to say my country where I grew up from had rivers. The land is our mother, but, like they're destroying our land. And where I grew up, the rivers were, half dry and the fish are, the fishing sources being depleted because they're taking everything. Yeah. So
it's absolutely
our land is hurting. Yeah. Good to talk to you.
We have to keep going, Hannah.
Yeah, we are. We'll keep going. We don't give up. Yeah.
Hannah, it's so wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to have you come on and talk about exactly these things. So thank you very much.
Marisa.
And I'm only sorry that I wasn't able to meet you at the Deathscape Symposium last year.
No, I'm sorry too, but look, we have got this bill that we want to change, so keep an eye, and we are also going to challenge this horrific treatment of the prisoners in isolation and solitary confinement.
That's
so
fantastic, and we'll watch this space.
Yeah, okay.
We'll be
bye-bye then.
Take care.
See you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
Hey, all you mob, it's Dr. Mark Winnetong here. Coronavirus has certainly changed the way we live, work and connect. These changes can be hard for some of us and can make us feel no good in our head or spirit, like sad or worried all the time. Some of us might already be dealing with other things like sickness, trauma, and this can make it really hard for us to feel good about anything at the moment. If you're feeling like this, remember, it's okay to ask for help. Have a yarn to someone you trust, like your family or an Aboriginal and Torre Strait Islander health worker. You can also call Beyond Blue, Lifeline, or the Kids Helpline to talk to someone, or look at some helpful information at headtohealth.gov.au on the internet.
A 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. And it's approximately... it's approximately 4:57, and I'm out of here. Beyond Zero is coming up next. Thank you so much to Karen Fletcher and also to Dr. Hannah Mcglade for coming on to the show. And stay tuned every Monday from 4 till 5 for the Doing Time show. And Beyond Zero is up next. Bye. Take care of each other.
As long as you are true fella, as long as you are real fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places. It doesn't matter what your name is. We got to have lots of changes. We need more brothers if we're to make it. We need more sisters if we're to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we're shouting? Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand?
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.